Hello, I'm Karen Pascal. I'm the Executive Director of the Henri Nouwen Society. Welcome to a new episode of Henri Nouwen, Now and Then. Our goal at the Society is to extend the rich spiritual legacy of Henri Nouwen to audiences around the world. We invite you to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Because we're new to the world of podcasts, taking time to give us a review or a thumbs up will mean a great deal to us and will help us extend our reach to more people. Now, let me take a moment to introduce today's guest. Today on this podcast, I have the pleasure of speaking with Art Laffin. Art has long been active in the faith-based, nonviolent movement for peace and social justice. He's the co-author of the book, The Risk of the Cross, Living Gospel Nonviolence in the Nuclear Age. And he's co-editor of Swords into Plowshares. Art Laffin is a full-time Catholic worker among the poor in Washington, D.C. Our mutual friend, Father John Deere, encouraged me to reach out and ask Art to do a podcast with us. Art Laffin, is it true that you've been arrested almost 200 times and have spent a lot of time in jail, all because of your faith-based, nonviolent stand for peace and social justice?
Well, I have been arrested many times. I've kind of lost count. When people ask me how many times I have been arrested, I usually say not enough. And the real purpose of acts of conscience, acts of divine obedience, civil resistance, it's really, for me, a prayer of intercession. And so when we see state-sanctioned violence being carried out, as a follower of Jesus, I have to resist that. And we always have to put God's law above human law.
You co-authored The Risk of the Cross, and it's just been updated and republished in 2021. This book is such a vital resource for people and groups seeking to learn about the danger presented by nuclear weapons. The book was first published 40 years ago, and Henri Nouwen wrote the foreword. How did that come about, Art? How did you get to know Henri Nouwen?
Well, through God's amazing grace, I first heard of Henri in 1977 when I was reading his book with open hands. I believe it was his first book. And then I met Henri at Yale Divinity School in 1978 through my good friend Dean Hammer, who was a student of Henri at the time. And Dean and I and several others helped to form and found the Covenant Peace Community. I audited a course that Henri taught on Thomas Merton, and he later published a book about Thomas Merton called Pray to Live. And then I attended Eucharist with Henri many times at Yale Divinity School. And Henri also celebrated Eucharist with us at the Covenant Peace Community for one morning a week for about a year. I have to say, celebrating Eucharist with Henri helped me enormously to have a deeper appreciation of the Eucharist. And Henri always spoke of the need to have a solid spiritual foundation in order to be sustained in a life of peacemaking and activism. And he would use the term, you need to create a spiritual basement for our lives. And this advice has been crucial for me in my own peace and justice ministry and as a Catholic worker. And so that's how I began to get to know Henri, and our friendship began to grow. In 1981, I was very moved. Henri asked myself and Dean Hammer and several others to help edit his book, A Cry for Mercy, Prayers from the Genesee Abbey, that was published at that time. That was a great honor for me. I mean, Henri was coming to us, young activists and people seeking peace and nonviolence and wanting to get our feedback and editing help in this book of prayers that he wrote, which in reading them really helped to deepen my own faith in Jesus and showed me how prayer is really a spiritual lifeline to God. And then through our collaboration and through our relationship, Henri was aware of course, the nonviolent resistance work we were doing. So we were in New Haven, an hour away from General Dynamics Electric Boat Shipyard, where the Trident nuclear submarine is built, what the Pentagon called the ultimate first strike weapon of our time. And so we were involved with many others in a nonviolent resistance campaign to stop the production of a Trident nuclear submarine and to call for the conversion, the economic conversion of Electric Boat Shipyard to non-military production. And so Henri was very supportive of our work and our ministry, and we in our community, in the process of writing a new version of gospel study guide using Mark's gospel to look at the nuclear threat and to call people to nonviolent action for disarmament. And so there was a study guide that was prepared that was used in the Archdiocese of Hartford at that time, and then it was not accepted ultimately by the Archbishop of Hartford. We got in trouble for using this study guide because the Archbishop felt it was not balanced enough, he said, with a just war tradition. Anyway, we ended up writing an ecumenical version of this study guide that was published by Seabury Press, and we titled it "The Risk of the Cross: Christian Discipleship in the Nuclear Age." And we asked Henri to write the foreword to the book, and Henri graciously accepted and wrote this beautiful, powerful foreword, which we decided to use in the new edition 40 years later. Henri's words stand the test of time. His witness stand the test of time. His counsel, his guidance, his call to follow Jesus really has helped me and so many people to really go deeper in our faith and our understanding of what it means to be followers of Jesus in the nuclear age.
I found it very, very touching, actually, to read that forward that he wrote, because I think it was so forward-thinking. But obviously, he had struggled to come to that place of really entering in. Wasn't it amazing that they called that Trident submarine Corpus Christi, the body of Christ? That must have been so offensive to all of you people of faith. I mean, it's offensive to me today. It almost, in a sense, called you forward to do something, I'm sure.
Well, actually, the name Corpus Christi was used for what they called a nuclear fast attack hunter-killer submarine. It was not a Trident submarine, but regardless of that fact, it was a blasphemy. And many people of faith who ordinarily was not concerned about the nuclear issue became concerned because the body of Christ is actually being branded on a nuclear submarine, a submarine of killing and of mass destruction. And so Henri, of course, was very aware of this and very supportive of those of us who were engaging in nonviolent resistance to stop not only the Trident program, but to work for total nuclear abolition and disarmament. And it took Henri, time to really process what his own involvement would be. But we extended an invitation to Henri to join us, meaning the faith community. And then there was also a very active group at Yale Divinity School at the time, the Yale Disarmament Group. And Henri accepted an invitation to lead the Stations of the Cross that we would hold every year during on Good Friday at the shipyard where these nuclear submarines are being built. And so Henri joined us in 1985. And if anybody listening has access to the book Befriending Life, Encounters with Henri Nouwen, that was edited by Beth Porter, there's actually a picture in the chapter that I wrote in the book of Henri leading the way of the cross.
I love this chapter. In fact, there's a quote in here from that you quote from The Road to Peace. Henri wrote, "Even today, having become deeply convinced of the immorality of fabrication, possession, and use of nuclear weapons, I still feel quite nervous about speaking or acting for peace. But all these memories and emotions do not diminish the truth that the call to peace is a call for all people, regardless of their many differences." Why do you think he was afraid? What do you think? He had a lot to work through. What was he working through with this?
I want to just remind the listeners that John Deere's excellent book that he edited on Henry's peacemaking journey, The Road to Peace, is a must read, and it really goes into greater detail, about Henry's journey to be a very public voice for victims of violence and war, and also to call people to embrace the nonviolence of Jesus. Henry had been, as I understand it, involved in the military chaplaincy in the Dutch military at one point. And I'm sure coming out of his World War II experience, he like so many others, had a lot of questions about how do we relate our faith in Jesus to war and the use of force and violence, and so there was always a very, I think there was a tension for Henry, but at the same time, he was really open to where the Holy Spirit is moving people at that time. And he really came to a place of really wanting to add his very unique voice and spiritual perspective to the movements for peace and justice. And we see this in a lot of his different writings, after, of course, when he went to Guatemala and then he spent time in Peru. And so he experienced firsthand the plight of the suffering poor. And he knew what war does to people. And he knew that the way out of this culture of violence and death that we are living through is the gospel of love and life and nonviolence. And so Henry was very supportive of me when I did the first Plowshares Action in 1982. He supported Dean Hammer and the Plowshares Berrigan's when that action happened in 1980, the Plowshares 8 action. He still had a lot of questions, but he knew us, and he knew, the spirit in which we were acting, and he, he sent letters of support. And in fact, if it's okay, could I just read an excerpt of a letter that he wrote me when I was in jail?
Oh, I'd love to hear it. Yes, please do. Yes.
Well, this is July 28, 1982, and Henry was at Pendle Hill, the Quaker Center, at a conference in Wallingford, Pennsylvania, and he wrote me this letter that I received in Montville jail. I had just been involved in the Trident 9 Plowshares Action on Independence Day, July 4th into July 5th. And so he's writing me just a few weeks later, and he says, many thanks for your wonderful letter. I really appreciate very much you taking time to write to me. You have been very much in my thoughts and prayers, and I am extremely grateful for your witness. It is a great honor to be connected with you and your friends, and in this way to be part of the body of resistance. Now, see that isn't that beautiful? I mean, just from where Henry is coming from, and all the circles that he's moving in. Really, I just was so grateful for this letter when I received it almost 40 years ago, right? And then he goes on to say, he invited me to come to his 25th celebration to the priesthood that was being held at the Genesee Abbey. And he says, I understand you won't be able to come to the celebration, but your ministry is clearly more important. All of us who will gather at the Abbey will certainly feel closely united with you and your friends. Thanks for giving me such a clear idea about your life in prison. I can see how this can be a very important time for you, and a time in which you can grow close to God, deepen your commitments, and broaden your ministry. I am sending your greetings to all the people at the conference. That's the conference he was attending at Pendle Hill. at the time. And they will be very glad to hear of your gratitude for their support. And then he writes, it was a great joy to hear that you have been found not guilty for your November 1981 action. I agree that the conscience of the people spoke clearly here. So I was part of a previous action, and I was going to, I had a trial about that, and I was found not guilty on one of the charges. So Henry was remarking about that here. And then he talks a little bit more about some of his future plans. But this, I think, gives you a little sense of, Henry, offering really his heartfelt, loving support for those of us who felt really called to engage in this kind of nonviolent resistance.
I found it very touching as I read Befriending Life and the little article that you included in your remembrance of Henry. It really spoke to me. I found it really inspiring, the truth of the fact that he was closer to those who took that stand, and in a sense wanted to celebrate that with you and to bless you for it. And I think that was really evident. One of the things I saw in your reminiscence of Henry in that book, and then really feel the strength of in The Risk of the Cross, one of the things that really permeates it is the importance of the Eucharist. And you alluded to that a little earlier. Can you help me understand how that has become a very important element within this process of resisting and being an advocate for nonviolence in this world that has nuclear weapons? Tell me a little bit about why is the Eucharist a vital part of this knowing of God and knowing of Christ in your nonviolent activism?
What a great question. And Henry's life was rooted in the Eucharist, and so whenever I was part of a Eucharistic liturgy with him, I mean, Henry, and I don't know what encounter you had in this regard, Karen, but he put his whole body and soul into the liturgy. I mean, in a way that I never experienced with any other liturgy I ever attended with a priest. I mean, he really felt, I think, like he was at the Last Supper with Jesus, and that he was living through the passion and suffering of Jesus, but also recognizing that God is giving him and all of us through the Eucharist this great gift of Jesus who transforms our life, and so Henry would always say the Eucharist means thanksgiving, and it is a great act of thanksgiving, of giving thanks to God for being able to open our lives, to break open our lives, to give to others. And so I was deeply affected by Henry's celebration of the Eucharist, and then as I really got to understand what the Eucharist really means, where Jesus is literally giving us the bread and wine, representing his life poured out in suffering love, that this is the essence of gospel nonviolence. And I don't know if you're aware of this new initiative that's being put forth by the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests. This initiative is called the Eucharist of Gospel Nonviolence, to really help our church understand that the Eucharist is really, it's not only the act of thanksgiving, but it's also the sacrament of gospel nonviolence. And so I really have grown in my understanding and appreciation of the central importance of the Eucharist in the life of the church and in the spiritual lives of followers of Jesus, and in how the Eucharist has been able to sustain me in my own journey of faith and discipleship, and it's really been my lifeline and to God, and so I owe a lot to Henri in helping me to open my own eyes and deepening my faith to really embrace this, because I don't know how else I could be sustained without the Eucharist and without really a real deep sense of connecting with Jesus through the Eucharist and through power of prayer.
It's interesting because in your book, The Risk of the Cross is actually a study guide. It's, 5 beautiful sessions. It's a wonderful thing that people could use for small groups or for personal study, but it's based on the Gospel of Mark. It opens that up. And one of the things that you just so clearly lay out is the non-violent nature of Jesus. I mean, it's undisputable as you go through, and I found that so powerful. I want to ask you a question, Art. What does it mean for you to take up the cross?
Well, what it means is to be involved, as Jesus was, to non-violently resist the powers of death and the forces of domination and destruction. And certainly Jesus was living under the brutal occupation of the Roman Empire at the time. And so he was very aware of what it would mean to announce God's reign of love and justice and nonviolence and equality in resistance to the religious powers of his day, in resistance to the power of the Roman Empire, which was engaging in this ruthless oppression of the Jewish people. And so today, let's look at the U.S. empire and what it's doing in the world, and how critical it is for people of faith and conscience to be that voice of love and compassion in resistance to all those forces that are crushing people, that are oppressing people, that are denying people the basic necessities of life, and to try to live an alternative. And that's really what the Catholic Worker has attempted to do. When Dorothy Day was starting the Catholic Worker, it was simply an attempt to really put into direct action the Sermon on the Mount and the social teachings of the Church. And Dorothy Day and Peter Morin started the Catholic Worker with no grand plan in mind except to follow this gospel mandate of living out the great commandment of love, to be peacemakers, and to establish justice. And so the risk of the cross encompasses all of this. And what it ultimately means is that you have to lay down your life. And so for me, the risk of the cross has involved, going into war zones, standing with people who are crying out for peace, victims of war. It means, engaging in nonviolent actions where I put myself in a situation where I would be jailed. And when I was growing up, I never dreamed I would be involved in such a thing. But look, when you ask the question, what would Jesus have me do in response to a government that is committed to destroying all life on the planet with its nuclear weapons, I have to take a stand, And so the risks that I've taken, I think, are very small, really, compared to the enormity of the evil that we face. And so I've been arrested many times. I've spent time in jail and prison. And I've been to war zones where I've seen unspeakable suffering in Iraq, in El Salvador, in Honduras. And I've also been to Guantanamo. I've not been able to. I went with a group of Catholic workers to try to visit the prisoners in Guantanamo to call for an end to their torture and for an end to terrible confinement that the United States has imprisoned Muslim men, calling them terrorists, enemy combatants, on and on. And these are our Muslim brothers, who have been branded by the government to be terrorists, and they're not given any due process. They're not tried, and they were unjustly kidnapped from their homes and taken to Guantanamo to be imprisoned. And so, in all these cases, there's the need to stand for justice and for love and resistance to these forces of death. And so I and many others have tried to do that. And most recently, too, with regard to resisting state-sanctioned killing and the death penalty, being arrested at the U.S. Supreme Court. And I always say there's nothing supreme about a court that sanctions killing. And yet today, as we speak, there's a man that's going to be executed in Oklahoma, and the appeals will be made to the Supreme Court of the United States, and there are 6 Catholics on the Supreme Court. There's only one Catholic, Sotomayor, who has been very publicly opposed to the death penalty, but all the others have gone along in signing off on the executions that have happened over the last several years. There were 13 executions in 7 months under the Trump administration. These were federal executions, and 5 of the 6 Catholic justices signed off on these executions, and now every other execution that happens, there's always an appeal made to the Supreme Court to intervene, and almost always they decide to go ahead with the execution. And so this is another dimension of the government sanctioning killing, and we as people of faith and conscience have to resist that to the point of even risking arrest and subjecting ourselves to imprisonment and on and on.
It's interesting because Christians, I think, are sometimes really not knowledgeable of the reality that for the first 300 years after Christ, there was no idea of a just war. Killing was wrong. Jesus had said, this isn't going to be won by the sword. And then all of a sudden, a just war came into being as a possibility. And unfortunately, Christians have really run with that. I think has there been an unquestioning consent by Christians given to nuclear weapons? What do you think the gospel has to say to this, and to the idea that it's justified to kill people as prisoners?
I think thanks be to God for the the many voices throughout history who have stood in resistance to the powers and principalities, speaking truth to power to the point of giving their lives. And here we can look at certainly the martyrs of the early church, the early Christian community, who refused to serve the emperor and refused to go into the military, by and large, in the first 3 centuries, as you pointed out. And then we have the witness of people like Francis of Assisi. And then moving into more contemporary times, we have the witness of certainly of Gandhi and of Martin Luther King Jr., the great witness of Dorothy Day, of Ben Salmon, who is a Catholic World War I conscientious objector, who spent several years in prison and was on a hunger strike. And the government tried to say he was insane, but he resisted because of his faith in the nonviolent Jesus. And then we have the witness of somebody like Franz Jägerstätter, who served one tour in Hitler's army and then refused because of his faith to do another tour. And his life witness was made public in this great book, Solitary Witness, by the great Catholic pacifist historian Gordon Zahn. But he refused to serve in Hitler's army and was beheaded on August 9th, 1983, father of 3 young girls. And his witness has really helped inspire so many people and to help Catholics especially understand that we can't comply with any order that sanctions killing. And then, of course, we have the witness of Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was murdered, who was assassinated while he was celebrating the Eucharist. Archbishop Romero is probably the greatest example of somebody who risked the cross and who showed us really the power of gospel love and justice in action. All these examples and all these efforts of different people and so many others who we'll never hear about, they have contributed to a new thinking in our church, where in 2016 there was a conference on just peace that John Deere was part of, and people like Marie Dennis and Ken Muddigan and other great Catholic peacemakers and peace and justice makers from other countries, including countries undergoing war. And they met with people in the Vatican and were able to get the Vatican to co-sponsor this conference on just peace. So to forever put away and to say that just war is no longer valid, as if it ever was. It can no longer be used. And we have to embrace a theology of just peace based on gospel nonviolence. And so that conference that happened in 2016 led to Pope Francis issuing a very powerful World Day of Peace message in 2017 about nonviolence. First time a Pope has ever done that. And then Pope Francis came out and said that the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. No Pope has ever done that. But it's due to the witness of so many people throughout history who have given their lives to following the nonviolent Jesus. And gradually, there's a new consciousness emerging in the church. And Henri is also an integral part of that. And in the foreword to the Risk of the Cross book, he's asking the question, is there hope for history, given the nuclear reality? And in the end, the real hope lies in people embracing the nonviolent Jesus.
It's interesting. I loved the new edition of The Risk of the Cross because throughout it also you recognize and weave throughout the realities of the many social justice issues we're facing, the environmental issues that we're facing. And one of the lines that stood out to me was the theft of the public treasury for warfare instead of health care is a sin and a crime. And I think that's something we need to identify. We just let governments around the world get away with spending huge amounts on warfare. And people go poor, hungry, unclothed, unhoused. And we need those funds to save the world, not to destroy it, really. I mean, the actual destructiveness that nuclear warfare can bring is just mind-boggling. Most of us can't even look there and imagine what would happen. But there have been all sorts of nuclear incidents. What do they call them? Broken arrows? I think your book is fabulous because it does give me kind of a history of the nuclear age. It also does give me a sense of, hey, stuff went wrong. Stuff happened. There's been accidents. That's really important for us to understand. I'd like you to tell me a little something about, I think, something very important. Let's move forward to, I want to ask you, what is ICANN? What does it stand for? Tell us a bit about this, because to me it seems to be something that we should all be doing our very best to celebrate and encourage.
Sure. Well, the ICANN is the acronym for the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. It's really an international global organization of many organizations and groups, and they're headquartered in Geneva. And they've been leading the campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, and they've been involved in helping the United Nations formulate this new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is a breakthrough treaty, which of course the United States has opposed and other nuclear nations have not honored, and was ratified last year. And so now there's a body of international law based on this treaty that says that nuclear weapons are illegal. So ICANN and many other groups, including the Vatican and groups like Pax Christi that I'm associated with, and of course the Catholic Worker, the Plowshares Movement. There are many organizations and groups that are supporting this treaty and calling on the United States and the 9 nuclear nations to honor this treaty. Another important voice in this movement has been the voice of the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the nuclear A-bomb survivors. They're called Hibakusha. And they've been central to this whole movement and campaign. In the book, the new edition of The Risk of the Cross, there's the acceptance speech. ICANN won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017, and Tezeko Thurlow, who was 13 years old when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, fortunately survived and has dedicated her life to nuclear abolition. And she was one of the two people giving the acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 to ICANN. And I encourage you and others to read her acceptance speech, which is in the appendix section of the book. It should be read by every person on Earth to show what nuclear weapons can do, and the fact that the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists say we're at 100 seconds to nuclear midnight, according to their doomsday clock, because of the threat of nuclear war and the climate crisis, and that we have to take urgent, immediate action to address the nuclear threat. And you had mentioned earlier that, all the resources that have been misused and wasted on nuclear weapons and war and military spending. And the estimate is close to $10 trillion that the United States alone has spent on nuclear weapons since the beginning of the nuclear age. Can you believe that sum? Almost $10 trillion. Think of all the lives that could have been saved if that money had been put to provide for the basic necessities of life for the poor of our world who have died in the 76 years now of the nuclear age. And I have to tell you, tonight, every Thursday, the Catholic Worker is in support, working in concert with a church in Arlington, Our Lady Queen of Peace, Arlington, Virginia, where we provide what we call the Feast on the Street for the homeless. So in a couple hours, I'm going downtown, right near the White House, in McPherson Square, and we provide a nice meal for our homeless friends who are living in squalor. They have nothing. There are more homeless encampments in D.C. than I've ever seen. These are the victims of our war machine and of the misplaced resources. This year's military budget is over $750 billion, and the Biden administration wants to spend at least $43 billion on a new modernization program to upgrade the nuclear arsenal, which is actually a 30-year plan. It began under Obama, continued under Trump, and now is extending over the next 20 years. The government wants to spend roughly $1.7 trillion to upgrade the U.S. nuclear arsenal at a time, in this pandemic time, when so many people are suffering, are lacking health care, are lacking housing, and other necessities to survive.
All right, I'm just going to say that I am inspired. I think you've moved me from the comfortable pew to the front line in my spirit, because I really hear this has to be resisted. It isn't something, I kind of associated it with the 60s and 70s and 80s, but it is an ever-present danger for us, and we as followers of Christ need to be active. I loved, there was a little line I underlined here in this beautiful acceptance speech from Tezeko Thurlow. This is the speech when she was awarded, or rather ICANN was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and she wrote, "The development of nuclear weapons signifies not a country's elevation to greatness, but its descent to the darkest depths of depravity. These weapons are not a necessary evil. They are the ultimate evil." It's pretty profound.
She and the Hibakusha, the survivors, also say that humanity cannot coexist with nuclear weapons. If we don't disarm, if we don't get rid of our nuclear intention, then we're going to destroy ourselves. It's that clear. And every day, as pointed out, I mean, every day we live with the reality that nuclear weapons could be used. And Congress would never be consulted beforehand. The American people wouldn't be consulted beforehand. The people of the world would not be consulted beforehand. the decisions will be made in secret, just like the secrecy that surrounded the decision to use nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so that's what's key for people to understand and to take action, to support this treaty, to call on our churches everywhere to embrace the gospel of nonviolence.
I'm going to encourage all of our listeners. I would love you to get The Risk of the Cross, Living Gospel Nonviolence in the Nuclear Age. It's a very well thought through, powerful, spiritual exercise. I have to tell you that in reading this book, I just felt like the core of it is the revelation of who is Jesus. Who is Jesus? And that to me was so profound. I've loved the book. I want to encourage all of you. I promise you that on our website we'll have lots of things that we've referred to today. Books that Henri wrote, things that I would hope you would link to. I even hope that we will be able to have that acceptance speech because you will be deeply moved by it. I know you'll be deeply moved. I want to thank you so much for joining with me, Art. And I'd like you just one more time perhaps just to speak specifically to the very urgent and pressing issue before you that has caught your heart, and that is our response to authorized state killing of prisoners. Would you like to maybe end on that note? Just tell us where you think we need to be on that.
Today, there's a man that's going to be executed, Julius Jones, in Oklahoma. And if the governor doesn't intervene, and if the Supreme Court doesn't intervene to stop this execution, an innocent man is going to be murdered. The Board of Pardons and Parole in Oklahoma recommended on a vote of 3-1 to not go forward with this execution because of overwhelming evidence of innocence. And so we as people of faith and followers of Jesus, really have to stand against killing and against violence wherever it's being carried out, and against racism, systemic racism in all its forms. It's very clear now. The teaching of the church is that the death penalty can never be accepted under any circumstance. It cannot be tolerated, and so. We have our work cut out for us, and I pray to God that a miracle will happen, that Julius Jones' life will be spared today. And I speak as a murder victim family member. My own brother was murdered, and by the grace of God, I was able to find a place in my heart to show mercy and compassion to the man who killed my brother, who was a man who had suffered from mental illness and was homeless, and he stabbed my brother to death back in September of 1999, and he's now in a prison hospital in Connecticut, where he will probably be for the rest of his life receiving the care that he needs. But had he been competent to go to trial at the time of this terrible atrocity, then he would have faced the death penalty in Connecticut. And thank God Connecticut no longer has the death penalty, as the 21 other states have abolished the death penalty. And most countries in the world have abolished the death penalty, but the United States hasn't. The federal government hasn't, and only, as I say, 22 states have. And so we have a long way to go, but with God, all things are possible. And that's one thing that comes out of the Gospel of Mark and the Risk of the Cross book, and that Henri always helped us to try to understand. With God, all things are possible. And so I just want to end on a note that, I was able to attend Henri's funeral and in Canada with John Deere, and we both grew up together. And I'll always remember the beautiful celebration of Henri's life, how his coffin was decorated with sunflowers, and people wrote beautiful messages on it. And at during the wake, as I walked from Henri's casket to the back of the church, I heard Henri's voice, because I didn't know at the time there was a video of Henri being played in the lower church. And I walked downstairs and I saw Henri preaching. There was a video of Henri preaching. And here I've gone from seeing Henri and Beth, and then Henri preaching, hearing his word, and Henri was, in that moment, Henri was ministering to me in a powerful way and continues to minister to me and so many others through his amazing life as a wounded healer. And I'm so grateful for the gift of Henri's life and friendship. And Henri connects us all in a very beautiful way and helps us to grow closer to Jesus in all that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Art. It has just been a real privilege to talk to you today. Our audience is coming from all around the world, not just America, North America, but all around the world. And I am so grateful for how you have vividly brought Henri to us today, and also brought to us a cause that we need to be awake to and alive to. I thank you all for listening. What an honor it's been for me to spend time with Art Laffin. The book he co-authored, The Risk of the Cross, has really deeply inspired and informed me. I want to encourage you to consider all that we've discussed today. Do you see Jesus as the true champion of nonviolence? If so, how do you want to live that out? How will you live it out in your community? For more resources related to today's podcast, click on the links on the podcast page of our website. You'll find links to anything mentioned today, as well as book suggestions. If you enjoyed today's podcast, we'd be so grateful if you'd take time to give us a review or a thumbs up, or pass this on to your friends and companions on the faith journey. Thanks for listening. Until next time.
Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, or follow us on social media for more Henri Nouwen content. For books, videos, and other resources, or if you'd like to receive free daily Henri Nouwen e-meditations, you can follow the links below.